The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, encased in an envelope so thick and creamy it felt like a slab of polished bone. Kwon Jinwoo didn't need to see the calligraphy to know who it was from. That particular shade of ivory, the one that whispered of old money and new arrogance, was Park Soo-jin's signature. He slid it open with a letter opener that was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel, its silver handle cold against his skin. The card inside was just as obscene, the letters embossed in gold leaf, announcing the union of his former fiancée to Han Min-jun, a man whose primary personality trait was his father's portfolio. The wedding was in 3 weeks. It was not a request for his presence, it was a command performance. A final, public twist of the knife to show everyone in their rarefied world who had truly won. Jinwoo placed the invitation on his vast mahogany desk, a stark white rectangle against the dark, gleaming wood. His office, 30 floors above the glittering sprawl of Seoul, was a fortress of quiet control, all chrome, leather, and smoked glass. But the invitation was a crack in the facade, a declaration of war disguised as a celebration of love. He felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest, the precise, calculated anger that had served him so well in his business dealings, the kind of dealings that never appeared in financial reports. Soo-jin had ended their engagement 6 months prior, citing his unsuitability for a family that prized public image above all else. It was a lie, of course. Her family had brokered a more lucrative merger with the Han Corporation. His empire was built in shadows. Theirs was built on branding. It was an alliance, not a romance, but the humiliation was the point. They expected him to decline, or worse, to attend alone, a solitary ghost at their feast of victory. They wanted him to look defeated. A ghost. He leaned back in his leather chair, the skyline a panorama of indifferent lights. No, he would not be a ghost. He would be a spectacle. He wouldn't bring a date from a circle. That would be too predictable, a transparent attempt to match her move. He needed something else. A disruption. A force of nature that this sterile, inbred world was utterly unprepared for. He needed a wild card, someone who could walk into that ballroom of vipers and not just survive, but rewrite the entire game. The idea was reckless, a strategic gamble fueled by pure, unadulterated pride. He needed to find a woman who was everything they were not, authentic, fearless, and utterly unimpressed by their gilded cage. He wanted to see the polite, frozen smiles on their faces crack. He wanted to watch Soo-jin's perfect composure shatter into a million tiny pieces. He didn't just want to attend her wedding, he wanted to become the main event. He found her in a place he rarely frequented, a restaurant named Veritas where the wine list was thicker than most novels and the air hummed with the low murmur of discreet power. He was there for a meeting, a necessary evil involving a politician with an expensive appetite. But his attention was snagged by the sommelier. Her name tag read Imani. She moved between tables with a liquid grace, her posture elegant, her focus absolute. She was a vision of poised professionalism, a stark contrast to the performative servility of the rest of the staff. Then came the incident. A portly man in a suit that was trying too hard waved her over with an imperious flick of his wrist. "This wine," he declared, his voice loud enough to curdle the sauce on a neighboring plate, "is corked." Imani picked up the bottle, examining the label with a calm that bordered on serene. She poured a small amount into a clean glass, swirled it, and inhaled its bouquet. "The 2012 Chateau Margaux," she said, her voice clear and low, cutting through the man's bluster. "An excellent choice. However, this bottle is not corked. It's simply breathing. Perhaps you're unaccustomed to the earthier notes of an aged Bordeaux." The man's face reddened. "Are you calling me ignorant?" he sneered, a hint of something ugly in his tone. "A girl like you telling me about wine?" Jinwoo watched, intrigued. This was the moment of truth. He saw the flicker of a dozen possible reactions: anger, fear, deference. Imani chose none of them. She held the man's gaze, her own eyes steady and unblinking. "Not at all, sir," she replied, her tone perfectly even. "I'm simply suggesting that, much like people, A fine wine doesn't always reveal its best qualities to those who are impatient. She gave him a smile that was polite, professional, and drew blood. The man, utterly disarmed and publicly neutered, could only stammer before falling silent. The politician at Jin Woo's table chuckled nervously. "She's got guts." Jin Woo didn't respond. He was watching Imani as she moved away, her composure absolute. She wasn't just a woman with guts. She was a master of control, wielding grace like a weapon. She had silenced an arrogant fool without raising her voice, protected the dignity of her profession, and done it all under the condescending gaze of a man who saw her as nothing more than a girl like you. In that moment, his reckless idea crystallized into a concrete plan. She was perfect. She was the beautiful, elegant disruption he was looking for. She was his wild card. He waited until the restaurant was closing, the clatter of plates replaced by the quiet sweeping of floors. Imani was hanging up her apron when he approached, a shadow detaching itself from the dim corner where he'd been observing. She turned, unsurprised, her expression professionally neutral but with a wariness in her eyes that told him she was used to unwelcome advances. "Can I help you, sir?" He bypassed the pleasantries. Time was a commodity, and he wasted little of it. "I have a business proposal for you, Ms. Jones." He had learned her full name from the maitre d'. Her composure didn't falter, but a flicker of curiosity entered her gaze. "My business is wine, mine is optics," he countered smoothly. "I require a partner for a high-profile social event. The role requires intelligence, poise, and the ability to command a room without speaking a word. I saw you do it tonight. I'm willing to pay handsomely for your time." Imani crossed her arms, a small, wry smile touching her lips. "Let me see if I understand. You saw me handle a drunk customer, and you thought I should rent her?" "Sir, with all due respect, I'm not for hire." Her refusal was exactly what he expected, and precisely why she was the right choice. A woman who could be bought easily wasn't worth the investment. He placed a slim, black envelope on the polished bar between them. "This isn't about hiring you. It's about commissioning a performance. Think of it as a one-night acting role. The compensation inside that envelope is $50,000. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, the only crack in her stoic facade. She didn't touch the envelope. "What kind of performance?" "You will portray my partner. We are sophisticated, happy, and utterly unimpressed with our surroundings. Your objective is to be yourself. Your very presence will be the statement I wish to make." She studied his face, her gaze analytical, searching. "Why me?" "Because you are not from their world," he said, the admission more honest than he intended. "And because you are not afraid of it." She was silent for a long moment, the weight of the offer hanging in the air. Finally, she slid the envelope back toward him. "The price is right, but the terms are not. If I do this, we have rules." He inclined his head, intrigued. "I'm listening." "Rule 1, she began, holding up a finger. "I am not your property. You do not grab my arm, speak for me, or treat me like an accessory. I am a partner or I am nothing." "Rule 2, you'll be transparent." "Who are these people? What is this event?" "I will not walk into an ambush." "And Rule 3, she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming steel, "is that my story is my own. I will not pretend to be some heiress you dug up. We create a plausible narrative, and we stick to it. If you want a silent doll, Mr. Kwan, there are stores for that. If you want a partner, you'll agree to my terms." Jin Woo felt a slow smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of warmth, but of appreciation. A shark recognizing another shark. "Miss Jones," he said, extending his hand. "It appears we have a deal." The preparation was a clinical exercise in world-building. Jin Woo arranged for a private appointment at a couturier whose waiting list was a year long. The showroom was a hushed temple of silk and tulle, filled with gowns in muted shades of champagne, silver, and blush. He gestured to the racks. "Choose whatever you like." He envisioned her in a deep sapphire or an elegant black, something that would signal quiet, untouchable wealth. Imani bypassed them all. Her eyes landed on a single dress, isolated on a mannequin, as if it were a piece of art. It was a column of scarlet silk, a slash of vibrant, unapologetic color in the pale room. The cut was deceptively simple, with a high neck and a daringly low back, designed to cling to every curve before pooling at the floor. "That one," she said, her voice firm. The stylist fluttered nervously. "Madam, that is a very bold choice for the occasion. The occasion calls for bold," Imani stated, her gaze meeting Jinwoo's in the mirror. "If you want to make a statement, you don't whisper it," he found he couldn't disagree. In that dress, she wouldn't just be a disruption. She would be a declaration. The cover story was crafted over expensive whiskey in his penthouse. She would be Imani Jones, an independent art curator he'd met while acquiring a rare piece of modern sculpture in New York. They invented shared memories, a rainy afternoon in a Soho gallery, a disastrous but hilarious dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, an inside joke about a pretentious artist. The process should have been sterile, a mere rehearsal, but moments of unsettling authenticity kept breaking through. He learned she was saving to open her own wine consultancy, that her poise was a shield forged in a world that constantly underestimated her. In turn, she saw past his cold, controlled exterior, catching glimpses of the man beneath the reputation, the flicker of loneliness in his eyes when he looked at the city lights, the hint of regret when he spoke of family. It was a fragile, transactional intimacy, built on a foundation of lies, yet it felt more real than his entire 3-year engagement to Sujin. On the night of the wedding, as she was getting ready, he presented her with a velvet box. Inside lay a diamond necklace, a river of ice so brilliant it seemed to suck the light from the room. It was a vulgar display of wealth, a piece designed to scream its own price tag. "A finishing touch," he said. Imani looked at it, then back at him. She gently closed the box. "It's beautiful," she said, "but it's not me." She reached into her own bag and pulled out a simple, delicate gold chain with a single, unadorned pearl. "Rule 3, she reminded him softly. "My story is my own." He watched as she fastened the delicate chain around her neck. The simple pearl against her skin was 1,000 times more potent than the mountain of diamonds. It was a symbol of her agency, a quiet reminder that while he had paid for her time, he did not own her. The Shilla Hotel was an obscene monument to wealth, its grand ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers and drowning in a sea of white roses. The air was thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. When Jinwoo's black sedan pulled up to the entrance, a hush fell over the reporters held back by velvet ropes. They knew the car. They knew the man. But they did not know the woman who emerged from it. Imani stepped out, and the night air seemed to crackle. The scarlet silk of her dress was a living flame against the cool marble and dark suits. Every camera flash seemed to find her, glinting off the simple pearl at her throat. Jinwoo offered his arm, and when her hand rested on his forearm, he felt a jolt, a current of energy that was both grounding and electrifying. They paused at the top of the grand staircase. The ballroom doors were open, revealing the glittering assembly within. Every head was turned toward them. A wave of silence rolled through the room, so profound it was like a physical force, sucking the air out. It was followed by a tidal wave of whispers, a sibilant hiss that spread from table to table. Jinwoo looked down at the sea of faces, the pale, startled faces of the women in their muted pastels, the hard, calculating eyes of the men in their identical tuxedos. They looked like a colony of disturbed penguins, their orderly world thrown into chaos by the arrival of a vibrant, tropical bird. He had wanted a spectacle, and Imani was delivering a masterpiece. She moved with the unhurried, regal grace of a queen, her chin held high, her gaze sweeping over the crowd with an air of faint, detached amusement. She was not intimidated. She was not even impressed. She looked, he thought, as if she were visiting a slightly provincial museum. For the first time that night, Jinwoo felt a genuine, unforced smile touch his lips. It wasn't the cold smirk of victory he had anticipated. It was something else, something warmer and far more dangerous. It was pride. He was no longer just the jilted ex-fiancé making a point. He was the man on the arm of this extraordinary woman, and in that moment, he felt like the most powerful man in the room. And then the doors opened, and they began their descent. The whispers followed them like a trail of smoke as they were led to their table, a conspicuously well-placed spot with a clear view of the head table. The gossip was a palpable entity in the room, a chorus of speculation. Who is she? An American by the looks of it. He certainly didn't waste any time. The words were meant to be discreet, but they were as sharp and pointed as glass shards. Their first test came in the form of Mr. and Mrs. Choi, an elderly couple whose family had been business rivals of Jinwoo's for generations, but public allies of Soo-jin's. Mrs. Choi descended upon them, her smile as bright and brittle as spun sugar. "Jinwoo, how wonderful to see you," she cooed, her eyes dissecting Imani from head to toe. "And you've brought a friend." "We haven't been introduced, Mrs. Choi," Jinwoo said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "This is Imani Jones. We met in New York, an art curator." Imani supplied smoothly, extending a hand. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine but reserved. "I advise private collectors." Jinwoo was acquiring a piece by Lee Yufin. The name drop was a masterful touch, specific and impressive, immediately establishing a plausible, high-status connection. Mrs. Choi was momentarily thrown off balance.
"Oh, how?"
Cultured before she could recover, her husband leaned in, his question a blunt instrument. "Jones? Is that an old family name?" The subtext was clear. "Are you one of us?" Imani's smile never wavered. "It's an honest one," she replied, her voice still light, but with an underlying current of steel. "Isn't that what matters most?" The Choice retreated, their polite smiles strained. Round 1 went to the wild card. Then came the main event. Soo-jin, a vision in white lace and diamonds, glided toward them, her new husband, Han Min-jun, in her wake. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was a cold, manufactured perfection, like a flawless orchid grown in a greenhouse. "Jinwoo," she said, her voice a silken purr. "I'm so glad you could make it." Her eyes slid to Imani, a flicker of something, was it jealousy or just surprise? In their depths. "And you are?" "Imani Jones." Jinwoo answered for her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. "My partner." The word partner hung in the air, deliberately ambiguous and infinitely more potent than girlfriend or date. Soo-jin's perfect smile tightened by a millimeter. Han Min-jun stepped forward, his own smile more of a predator's baring of teeth. "A pleasure," he said, his gaze lingering on Imani for a beat too long. It was a look of appraisal, the kind of look a man gives a luxury car or a prize horse. It was dismissive, proprietary, and it made Jinwoo's jaw tighten. That's when the air changed. The polite social skirmish was about to escalate into a full-blown war. The evening wore on, a tedious parade of champagne and stilted conversation. Toasts were made by Soo-jin's father, by Min-jun's business partner, by a bridesmaid who cried through a rambling, saccharine speech. Jinwoo nursed a glass of whiskey, feeling a grim satisfaction. Their presence had successfully poisoned the atmosphere. The joy in the room felt forced, the laughter brittle. Every few minutes, he would catch Soo-jin glancing their way, her mask of bridal bliss slipping to reveal the cold fury beneath. He had achieved his objective. He had turned her triumph into a tense, uncomfortable spectacle. Then the master of ceremonies announced a period for open toasts from any guests who wished to share their well wishes. Jinwoo swirled the amber liquid in his glass, assuming the formalities were over. He glanced at Imani, expecting to see the same polite boredom on her face. Instead, he saw a quiet resolve. And then, she stood up. The movement was so fluid and unexpected that it drew every eye in the room. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the ballroom. Jinwoo's hand froze midway to his lips. He turned to her, his eyes wide with a silent, urgent question. "What are you doing?" This was not part of the plan. The plan was to be a silent, disruptive presence. Not to take center stage. She met his gaze and gave him the slightest of nods, a look that conveyed a simple, infuriating message. "Trust me." The rustle of her scarlet dress was the only sound as she walked toward the stage. The room was utterly, breathtakingly silent. She took the microphone, her confidence so absolute it seemed to radiate from her. She didn't look nervous. She looked like she belonged there. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the vast room. "I don't know the happy couple well. In fact, I only know one person in this room tonight. But I was invited here as his partner, and from what I've seen, he is a man who values loyalty and truth above all else." She paused, letting the words sink in, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on the head table. "I'm a curator of art," she continued, "and in my line of work, you learn to spot the difference between a pretty replica and a true masterpiece. A masterpiece has depth. It has a story. It has flaws that make it more beautiful, not less. It isn't afraid of the light." She raised her glass. "A marriage, I think, should be a masterpiece. Not a perfect, polished performance for the world to see, but a true, honest, and sometimes messy collaboration. One built on a foundation so strong it doesn't need constant public validation." She smiled then, a brilliant, genuine smile directed at Soojin and Minjun. "So I'd like to toast not just to your public celebration, but to your private truth. May you build a love that is honest when no one is watching and brave enough to be beautifully imperfect. To a true masterpiece." She took a sip of champagne and walked off the stage, the silence she left in her wake heavier than any applause. The toast was a tactical nuclear strike delivered with the grace of a ballerina. Imani hadn't said a single insulting word, yet she had completely delegitimized the entire event. She had held up a mirror to the room, and no one liked the reflection. The polite applause that followed was scattered and weak. People were no longer looking at Jinwoo and Imani with curiosity. They were looking at Soojin and Minjun with a new, unsettling speculation. The bride's smile was a rictus of frozen glass. The groom looked like he had swallowed acid. As Imani approached their table, her progress was intercepted by Han Minjun. He stepped into her path, his body language aggressive, his polished veneer stripped away to reveal something raw and ugly underneath. "That was quite a performance," he hissed, his voice low and laced with venom, meant only for her and Jinwoo to hear. "But the act doesn't quite work when you know what the performer really is." Imani stopped, her expression unreadable. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." Minjun's lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, I think you do. I remember you now. Veritas. The little sommelier who thought she was too good to pour my wine." The revelation landed with a thud. He was the obnoxious patron. The man whose arrogance had, ironically, led Jinwoo directly to her. Minjun saw his chance to reclaim his power, to humiliate her in front of the man she had arrived with. He turned his sneer toward Jinwoo. "Did you know, Kwon? Your art curator spends her nights recommending Cabernet to tourists. Is that where you find your women now? In the service industry?" Jinwoo went rigid. A dangerous stillness fell over him. His knuckles were white where he gripped the back of his chair. But before he could utter the cold, violent words forming in his throat, Imani spoke. She didn't flinch. She didn't look ashamed. She looked directly into Han Minjun's eyes, her own gaze clear and cutting. "Yes, I pour wine, Mr. Han," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "It's an honest living. It taught me many things. For instance, it taught me how to identify something that has gone bad. Something that's turned, that's corked and rotten, long before anyone else even takes a sip." She let the words hang in the air, her meaning utterly unmistakable. "The smell," she added, her eyes flicking to a stunned Soojin, "is quite distinct." The implication was brutal, a direct assault on his character in front of his new bride and anyone close enough to hear. The social game had just ended. Jinwoo stood up slowly, his movement a silent threat. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with social embarrassment and everything to do with imminent violence. They were done here. The exit was as dramatic as the entrance. Jinwoo simply took Imani's arm, a silent signal to his driver who was already waiting, the car door open. They didn't look back. The silence in the back of the sedan was a living thing, thick and suffocating. The neon and halogen lights of Seoul blurred past the tinted windows, painting fleeting streaks of color across Imani's impassive face. Jinwoo stared straight ahead, his mind a maelstrom of shock, fury, and an emotion he couldn't name. It felt unnervingly like admiration. His phone began to vibrate on the seat between them, a relentless, buzzing intrusion. Then Imani's phone lit up as well. The aftermath had already begun. He could picture it, a digital wildfire tearing through the group chats and social media feeds of Seoul's elite. Kwon Jinwoo's mystery woman publicly accuses Han Min-jun of being rotten. The headlines would be sensational. The fallout significant. He had wanted to cause a ripple. She had unleashed a tsunami. They arrived at his penthouse, the elevator ascending in a tense, shared quiet. The doors opened onto a vast living space, a wall of glass revealing the city glittering like a carpet of shattered diamonds below. The view was meant to inspire a feeling of power, of dominion. Tonight, it just felt empty. Imani walked to the window, her red dress a slash of defiance against the cool, minimalist decor. Jinwoo broke the silence, his voice rougher than he intended. "What was that?" he demanded, loosening his tie. "The toast. The confrontation with Han. That was not the plan." She turned from the window, her expression no longer poised or performative. For the first time, he saw a glimmer of vulnerability in her eyes, mixed with an unshakable resolve. "The plan," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "was for me to be an object. A beautiful prop in a red dress, designed to make your ex-fiancé jealous. That was the job I agreed to." She took a step closer. "But that man, Han Min-jun, he looks at people like they're things to be used and discarded. He did it to me at the restaurant, and he did it again tonight. He looks at the world the same way you were looking at me when you made your offer." The accusation landed squarely in his chest, a direct hit. "I am not a thing, Jinwoo," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. "I'm not a weapon for you to aim at your enemies. My dignity isn't for sale." He had no defense because she was right. He had seen her strength, her fire, and his first instinct had been to modify it, to use it for his own petty, prideful war. He had been so focused on the game that he had failed to see the person standing in front of him. A profound, unfamiliar shame washed over him, extinguishing the last embers of his anger. He had brought a queen to a game of pawns and had been surprised when she refused to play by his rules. The tension in the room had shifted from anger to something quieter, more fragile. The spectacle was over, and all that remained were two people in a silent room high above the city, the truth hanging between them. Jinwoo walked over to a marble-topped console table where he had left the black envelope from their first meeting. He picked it up and held it out to her. "This was for the performance," he said, his voice low and devoid of its usual hard edge. "You more than earned it." Imani looked at the envelope, then at his face. She took it from his hand, her fingers brushing his. He had expected her to leave then, the transaction complete. But she didn't move. He felt a desperate, unfamiliar need to keep her there, to undo the clinical nature of their arrangement. Acting on an impulse he didn't fully understand, he retrieved a single, blank keycard from a drawer. He slid it onto the console table. "The deal is over," he said, meeting her gaze. "The performance is finished. What I'm asking for now isn't for sale." He took a breath. "I want to have dinner with Imani Jones. The woman who pours wine and quotes art and can silence a ballroom with nothing but the truth. No cover story. No rules about who can speak. Just dinner. Your choice of restaurant. Your terms." It was a new offer, stripped of all pretense. It was a surrender. She looked from the envelope of cash in her hand to the key card on the table. It was a clear choice, the payment for a job well done or the key to something unknown. For a long, heart-stopping moment, he thought she would choose the money. She deserved it. It was what they had agreed upon. She clutched the envelope, and his stomach tightened. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she placed the envelope back on the table, leaving the $50,000 untouched. She picked up the keycard. She walked to the door of the penthouse, her red dress trailing behind her like the closing of a curtain. With her hand on the handle, she paused but didn't look back. "I'll text you the address," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "And for the record, I prefer Italian. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Jinwoo alone in the vast, echoing space. The war he had wanted to win was over, and he had lost in the most spectacular way possible. And as he stood there, the keycard to an unknown future on his table, he realized it was the most profound victory of his life. Outside, the city's gossip machine was churning, building a narrative of scandal and revenge. They didn't know that the real story had already moved on, and it was just beginning.